The November rain in Portland lashed against the glass, creating a gloomy soundtrack for a Thanksgiving dinner that was supposed to be cozy. Inside, candlelight shimmered on silver cutlery and fine bone china, but the atmosphere was thick with fakery. Richard, my father, abruptly put his fork down on the table. He didn't look at the steaming turkey. He looked straight into my eyes with a gaze as cold as steel. "Your job is to work, Evelyn, and Bella's job is to enjoy life. If you have a problem with that arrangement, the door is right there." There was no hesitation, no softening of the blow, just the naked truth they had hidden for years, now exposed. Bella, my sister, didn't even blink. She sipped her red wine, the corner of her mouth twitching up in a satisfied smile, as if she were watching a good play. My mother, Margaret, stared down at her napkin, silent as a mossy rock, complicit in the cruelty. In that moment, my worldview shattered. I realized I was never a daughter in their eyes. I was an employee, a cash machine, a labor force to maintain the shiny facade of this family. I didn't argue. I didn't cry or slam the table. My silence was louder than the storm outside. I stood up, pushed my chair back. The sound of wood scraping the floor was piercing. I walked straight out into the freezing Portland rain, making a choice that would bring their whole world crashing down. Before I tell you how I destroyed them, tell me, where are you listening to this story from? And if you were me, what would you do? My name is Evelyn, and this is how I taught my family their final lesson. To understand why I walked out that door without hesitation, you have to know where I grew up. It was a massive glass greenhouse in the suburbs of Portland. From the outside, it looked brilliant and warm, but for the person working inside, it was a cold hell. While other kids spent weekends riding bikes or going to the movies, I spent my childhood carrying soil bags that weighed twice as much as I did. I remember kneeling in wet mud, my fingers so numb from the cold I couldn't feel them, trying to graft young branches while Richard stood watching, calling it character building. But that character building was never meant for Bella. Bella never touched dirty soil. My sister floated through childhood like a guest of honor in her own home. While I wore muddy coveralls, Bella dressed in clean silk dresses, holding a violin or ballet shoes. My parents believed she had artistic potential, and they automatically viewed me as the crude scaffolding that had to hold her up so she could shine. The image that haunts me most is those rainy afternoons. I would stand outside the glass door, rain mixing with sweat running down my neck. Through the foggy glass, I saw Bella practicing ballet in the heated room, classical music drifting out. My mother sat there, clapping for her every move. Bella's cleanliness, scent, and leisure were the exact opposite of my filth, exhaustion, and roughness. Even as we grew up, that cruel division of labor didn't change. It just became more sophisticated. Even when we became adults, the cruel script remained the same. Bella glided through life on soft cushions, praised for the smallest efforts, while I became the invisible engine running beneath all that glamour. I was no longer the muddy little girl. I became the unofficial chief operating officer. I managed inventory, reviewed every red invoice, and handled emergency repair calls at 3 a.m. that no one else knew how to fix. Richard would pat my shoulder, not the hug of a father, but the pat you give a reliable machine. He looked at me the way people look at an old pickup truck. It doesn't need maintenance, it doesn't need paint, but it must always run. My mother, Margaret, often whispered that I was resilient. That was her polite, cowardly way of justifying her neglect. She praised my strength so she wouldn't have to feel guilty about pouring all her tenderness into Bella. The truth was much simpler. I kept this family from going bankrupt because no one else would do it. I was stupid enough to believe this was a fair transaction. I kept hoping that if I survived one more crisis, saved one more failed season, they would finally see me. Not as free senior staff, but as a daughter. So, when we all sat down at that Thanksgiving table, with cinnamon-scented candles and a golden turkey, I naively thought tonight would be different. Maybe the years I spent carrying their world on my shoulders would finally be rewarded. But the silence between us had been built long before tonight. And when Richard opened his mouth, I realized it wasn't a crack in the relationship. It was the foundation of it. I felt the shift in the air before the words were even spoken. The way Richard leaned back in his leather chair. The way my mother's eyes dropped as if she already knew the script. Bella twirled the stem of her crystal wineglass, pretending not to wait for the drama, but her smirk betrayed her cruel excitement. And then the sentence dropped, sharp and casual as a comment about the weather. Your job is to work while your sister enjoys life. For a second, I thought I misheard. Steam from the turkey rose between us. The flickering candles and every childhood memory lined up in my head like silent witnesses. But Richard didn't blink. He was deadly serious. Every syllable had been incubated for years, waiting for this day. My mother still didn't move. She pressed her napkin tight into her lap, avoiding my eyes the way she always did when she was complicit in evil, but didn't want the responsibility. Bella sat up straighter, smoothing her hair like a queen adjusting her crown. I tried to take a breath to stay calm. Dad, that's not... He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. If you have a problem with that, the door is right there. That was it. The line didn't just bruise, it completely severed the relationship. The years of effort, the bills I quietly paid, the crises I broke my back to solve, all dismissed with a firing so neat it didn't even sound angry. It sounded rehearsed. I looked around the table, searching for even one face showing guilt or regret. Nothing. Richard was rigid and casual. Margaret shrank into herself. Bella was almost smiling. The room suddenly felt tight and too bright. Every plant in the greenhouse behind me, every leaf I had cared for, now felt like an audience watching me realize my role. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a partner. I was infrastructure. Replaceable. Expected to exist. Instead of exploding, a strange calm washed over me, like the dead silence in the eye of a storm. I pushed my chair back. The screech of legs on hardwood made everyone look at me. They didn't look out of concern, they looked out of annoyance, as if I were interrupting their aristocratic dinner. Fine, my voice rang out, steady and emotionless. I'll go, and you can start paying your own bills. For the first time that night, Richard's face twitched. Margaret's wide eyes flashed with panic. Bella froze with her wine glass near her lips. They understood what those words meant. They just never thought I had the guts to say them. I reached down to my belt and unclipped the heavy keychain, still warm from my body heat. These were keys to the warehouse, the delivery trucks, the safes, and the specialized tool cabinets that no one else in the house knew how to use. I held them for one last heartbeat, feeling the weight of the exploitation, then let them drop onto the table. Clang. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp as a judge's gavel sentencing death, cutting through the stifling air. No one dared to touch them. I turned my back and walked straight toward the rear door leading to the greenhouse, the place where I had spent more time than in my own bed. I shoved the door open. The freezing storm wind rushed in, blowing out 2 candles and flipping the tablecloth edges. My mother gasped. Richard swore under his breath. Bella whined that the damp wind would ruin her curled hair. But I didn't look back. I walked straight into the storm, letting the rain soak my coat, washing away the fake smell of that house. I didn't run. Running is for the scared. I was walking away with relief. Wait, pause for a second. If your own parents told you that your sole purpose in existence was to make money for your sister, what would you do? Would you have the courage to walk out that door into a storm like Evelyn? Or would you stay out of family duty? Leave a comment, "I would go," or "I would stay," below. Now, let's watch Evelyn turn that storm into a weapon. 40 minutes later, I unlocked the door to my studio apartment. Warm, quiet air greeted me, smelling faintly of potting soil and lemon wood polish. My plants, the plants that actually belonged to me, were growing lush and green on the exposed brick wall, creating patterns of freedom that I had always craved. I shed my soaked coat and went straight to my desk, not bothering to dry my hair. My laptop lit up, the cold blue light reflecting on my face. My fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation, precise as a surgeon removing a tumor. Cancel recurring payments. Revoke shared access. Delete authorization from every nursery bank account. Every mouse click was a breath of freedom I had been holding for years. Then I opened the dark blue folder I had quietly taken from the company's safe before leaving. Inside were the documents for a trust account my grandmother had left for Evelyn's future. $150,000. The number sat plainly on the paper, but the actual current balance was around zero. The money had been drained 3 years ago. My eyes stopped at the signature line under the withdrawal order. It was written carefully to look like my signature, but the hook at the end of the letter N curled up weakly, a handwriting habit specific to my mother, Margaret. The betrayal didn't hit like an explosion of anger. It hit with a bone-deep chill, colder than the rain outside. They didn't just exploit my labor. They committed a crime. They stole the independence my grandmother meant for me to fuel Bella's frivolous lifestyle. I closed the folder, gently, as if closing the eyes of a corpse. They wanted me to walk out that door? Fine. But they had no idea that the person they just kicked out was holding the key to sending them to prison. For nearly the first 24 hours, my phone was completely silent. But make no mistake, that wasn't peace. That was the calculated silence of arrogant people. They were quiet because of pride. They were sure that I, obedient little Evelyn, was sitting in my shabby apartment, crying with regret, waiting for them to grant me forgiveness so I could return to being a slave. But by the morning of the second day, when brutal reality started invading their little kingdom, the notifications started going off like machine gun fire. Ding. Message from Richard. Zone 3 irrigation system isn't working. The peace lilies are wilting. Come fix it now. No greeting, no apology, just a crude command, as if I were still his 24/7 technician. Ding. Richard again, tone harsher. The imported tulip order is stuck at the port. Bank says payment authorization missing. What kind of game are you playing? Thousands of dollars are sitting in the sun. Stop being childish. Ding. And of course, Princess Bella joined in. Mom is crying loudly at home and it's ruining my mood before my audition. Can you stop being dramatic and handle this mess? Your negative energy is ruining my vibe. Negative energy. That was the fancy term my sister used for 20 years of hard labor and silent sacrifice. I didn't reply to a single message. I didn't even feel angry. I just found their naivety funny. I silenced notifications, placed my phone face down on the cold oak table, and returned to the landscape design proposal in front of me. My hand held the pencil steady, my breathing even and relaxed. They could scream, they could shake the greenhouse bars all they wanted, but they forgot one basic thing. They no longer owned the foundation. By noon, the phone stopped vibrating. They thought I was playing hide and seek for attention, but they didn't know I had already lit the chessboard on fire. The next morning, while I was standing in a glass conference room with senior designers approving structural loads for a rooftop garden, the receptionist's voice cut sharply through the intercom. "Evelyn, your parents are here. They say it's a matter of life and death." The whole room went silent. Before, my stomach would have knotted in fear, but today, I only felt a cold calmness, like stepping into winter water on purpose. "I'll handle it," I said, nodding an apology to my partners before walking out to the hallway. The company lobby was a space of tempered glass and polished concrete, flooded with modern white light. And standing lost in that luxury were Richard and Margaret. They looked smaller and more pathetic than ever. Their clothes were rumpled, their eyes darting around in panic. Margaret clutched her handbag to her chest like it was the last lifebuoy. "Evelyn!" Richard roared, trying to regain his old authority, but his voice cracked on the second syllable. "This has gone too far. You have to come home immediately and fix what you broke." I stopped 10 feet away from them, letting the physical distance speak to my status. "I didn't break anything," I said, my voice low and steady. "I simply stopped holding it up." Richard stepped forward, face red with anger and fear. "We have nowhere to go. The landlord is demanding rent and they say the company accounts are locked. Are you trying to kill your parents?" "That's not my problem," I replied coldly. "You said I wasn't family, just labor. Do you remember the door you pointed me to?" His face shifted from anger to sheer terror. "Don't twist my words." "I'm not twisting anything." I slowly pulled the folder from under my arm. "I'm just executing justice." I held the photo of the withdrawal document up high, keeping it steady right in front of Richard's face. "This is a withdrawal order from the trust fund Grandma left for me. $150,000. Richard's shoulders slumped as if the weight of the truth just crushed his spine. Margaret let out a choked sob, gripping her husband's coat. "This signature," I pointed to the black ink, "is a forgery. Mom tried to copy my writing, but she forgot I never curl the letter in weekly like that." "Evelyn, please," Margaret whimpered, tears starting to smear her heavy makeup. "We needed that money. Bella needed a chance to shine. We were going to pay it back." "You had 3 years," I cut in, my voice sharp as a scalpel. "And you didn't pay back a dime. You didn't borrow. You stole my future to buy dresses for your favorite daughter." Richard tried to salvage a shred of authority. He stepped forward, raising his hand out of old habit, intending to slap me into submission. But he froze in midair. Because for the first time in his life, I didn't flinch. I stood tall, staring into his eyes with the coldness of a judge, absolutely fearless. That look forced him to step back. "You wouldn't dare report this," he hissed weakly. "We are your parents." "That title expired the night you pointed me to the door," I replied. "I sent the file to the Economic Crimes Division this morning. They are reviewing the evidence." Both of them staggered as if struck by lightning. You want to send your parents to jail?" "You won't go to jail," I delivered the final verdict. "If you leave Portland today and use the money from selling your assets to repay what you stole. If not, I will let the law do its work." I nodded a signal. 2 large security guards stepped out from a discreet corner. Richard froze in humiliation, while Margaret sobbed loudly. They were escorted to the revolving doors, thrown out of the building like petty troublemakers. The glass doors slid shut behind them with a soft hiss, completely cutting off the tumor that had attached itself to me my whole life. After the lobby emptied and the winter sun set behind the skyscrapers, I returned to my desk. My colleagues didn't pry, they just quietly gave me space. The minimum respect my family never managed to give. I opened my laptop, not out of slavish habit, but out of free will. My future was officially unhooked from their chains. In the following weeks, everything collapsed just like the laws of physics, cruel and precise. Without my income to prop it up, the nursery didn't survive a single audit. The bank seized the assets. The glass panels of the greenhouse that were once Richard's pride were dismantled and sold for scrap to a company in the suburbs. For the first time in decades, the king and queen had to learn to live like commoners. Richard found a job as a night security guard at a damp industrial warehouse, where he had to take orders instead of giving them. Margaret, the woman who once looked down on my dirty hands, was now working at a supermarket checkout, her aristocratic hands scanning barcodes on vegetables every day. And Bella, the little princess, moved up north, crammed into a shabby apartment with 3 roommates, splitting every electricity bill while her Hollywood dream faded with age. I didn't gloat, but I didn't save them either. My energy now poured into 5 acres of wild land I just bought on the outskirts. The land was rough, overgrown with weeds, but it was mine. The first morning standing there, breathing in the scent of morning dew and damp earth, I knelt down, pressed my hand to the cold soil, and felt a new pulse. Here, growth didn't require bloody sacrifice. It just needed patience and honesty. They chose their path of destruction. And me? I just opened a new path. It was that simple. How do you feel about Richard and Bella's ending? Was that punishment too cruel, or was it well-deserved karma? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any deep revenge stories, where justice doesn't need to be loud to be deadly.